Good morning, everybody. So first of all, I really would like to thank the BSides team for having me here, and I am really so happy to be back to Israel. I absolutely love the country, and I am especially pleased, of course, that I was given this fantastic opportunity to open this event. So thank you very much. As you probably could have guessed, so I am from Ukraine, and this war, of course, concerns me more, directly. And this is where we will talk a little bit about this hybrid war. You know, a term which existed already, probably for 10 years, while not having a war. And this is actually, for the first time, we actually have the hybrid war, even though it's in the newspapers, has been forever. And we will understand, so there have been a large anticipation, so that cyber will have one of the cardinal or main role in this war, and it's just did not happen. So why? And this is what I will talk to you about. So, you know, I left Ukraine, so I was born, I grew up, and I spent most of my adult life in Ukraine. So when I left Ukraine in 2005, I became painfully aware that I'm the only one Ukrainian on the international scene. So I felt like it was always maybe a role to explain people who Ukrainians are, to be, you know, a good representative of this nation, and, you know, you recognize the T-shirt. So when I was at the CCC Camp in 2019, it was coincide with Ukrainian Independence Day, so I put my T-shirt, marched through the camp, and if you have never been in the CCC Camp, it's fantastic, it's international, it's really fantastic place to go, it's whole week. So just to say, well, this country exists. And then, of course, on the February 24, our life has changed, and I speak a little bit more how I interacted with Ukraine before and during the war. But, you know, I just stopped even putting my makeup because, day by day, I was just crying. And actually, the first 6 days, I was in such a shock. I did not sleep. I did not eat at all. And Inbar, one of the organizers of the event, he told me, Marina, you know what? I really highly recommend you to sleep and to eat. I say, I'm fine. He says, you will crash. No. And guess what? A few days later, I just crashed terribly. So sometimes I often ask, from where you are. I am in Ukraine, so that is, I circled it for you. And, you know, normally you would not even hear ever those names, but now even the State Secretary of the USA know that exactly place. Why? Because 2 days ago or 3 days ago, Russia has launched a rocket on a shopping mall, and it's my native town. And two of my relatives, one of my relatives, my sister-in-law, was on the parking lot as it happened. She was just heading toward the shopping mall, and my sister was working in the office next to this mall. So, and as my sister was joking, well, that's a mall where we bought your underwear before you got back to Europe. Great. Now the State Secretary of the USA aware of the shopping mall where I bought my last pair of the underwear. Surrealistic. So I've always been working closely with Ukraine. So I left then because nothing was really much happening with security in Ukraine. And then I returned back to Ukraine as security started happening. So I've been always having strong ties with the government, with the industry, with the private sector, with cybersecurity companies. And this year, I even signed a contract on and a lot of governmental projects where right now Ukraine is doing really a lot of fantastic work in security. And, you know, the war and the danger was already in the air. So the organized Sons Grids War, where I was allowed to participate as assistant to the teams to help them to play, because Grids War include hacking critical industrial systems. So it was beautifully organized event. A lot of fun, really. And so one of the also directions which I was leading is developing the national OT Russia security training. So where I wanted to work together with the Phoenix Contact to create the lab stands. And as you can see, Ukraine always wanted to be in European Union, and just, you know, sometimes just as a affirmation, put a flag and maybe someday it will happen, and now it did. So this was I was planning to build such stands, you know, like this is people from whom I've been working in Ukraine. It was before New Year. We are all happy. My family is happy. We had a lot of plans for 2022. It was all fun. And I even left my pajama and my flip-flops in Ukraine because I was supposed to return in January, but then I could not because already starting from the middle of January, it was advised not to fly, and basically it was advised for everybody who can leave Ukraine to start leaving, like especially foreigners. So, and then my sister started sending me pictures as she is hiding from the bombs. So now let's go back a little bit now to the hybrid warfare. Yes, no, is it happening? Has it been before? Is it something, is it now a new format? Is it old? Is it like what it is? And the problem is that, you know, like there is a lot of course, overhype. As my very good friend Manuel Atuk says, like this war is conducted on the PPTs. I say it's conducted in the newspapers. You know, like we overuse and abuse wrong terms just to create a little bit of more excitement. Consultants need to also create a little bit of fun and danger, you know, so that they could sell consultancy services. Vendors need to sell their appliances. But the very definition, war is intense armed conflict. So anything what we've been experiencing before, you can call it political crisis, maybe even military crisis, but mostly political crisis, but it is no war by definition. And this is why everything what we've learned before, like any events which was happening in peaceful time, it was considered as impactful and maybe unacceptable, is actually a nuisance and negligible in the war. And this is why we've got it completely wrong about how this hybrid warfare is actually going to happen when it's really will be happening as a military conflict with all of those components which belongs to the hybrid warfare. And again, now if you look in the definition of hybrid warfare, it is a military strategy. So hybrid warfare is simply not applicable to the peaceful times. And then, you know, like, so hybrid warfare, it has a lot of components, political, diplomacy, influencing methods, blah, blah, blah. There is a lot of components. So cyber is just one of them. And the problem is also that in majority, like in the past, like in the peaceful times, we mostly, when we spoke about cyber warfare, mostly people were referencing to information warfare, which is disinformation, fake information, like fake news and so on. But information warfare is a completely separate component. It's not even cyber warfare. So in the past, we completely spoke about these terms wrongly. We overestimated them, and this is why there was anticipation about role of cyber and cyber warfare in the military conflict or in real hybrid warfare was overestimated and was got wrong. So you maybe think like, well, who is she? Like, how she even can talk about this topic? What does she know about this? So this is a little bit about myself. So I'm specializing on the degradation and destruction of industrial or any basically automation processes or physical equipment by the means of cyber attacks. So what you know like about the saboteurs in the normal like regular army, I do the same by the means of the cyber attack. So it's basically, I'm specializing on offensive cyber physical security. And as I was preparing the slides, I figured apparently there is even a term for that, like sabotage. So I am a saboteur, apparently. And I have more than 10 years in this field. So I'm probably can call myself veteran. So if you know, like, there is a book of Malcolm Gladwell who says, like, you become an expert if you put into something like more than 10,000 hours. So in my field of work, I probably put like at least 7 times more. So and as I was like learning and discovering this field, and I was pretty much, as I started working in this field, I was almost pretty much alone. Nobody had been specializing on this. So I've been discovering a lot of different ways or components, like which exploits I need to develop, what is the difficulty, challenges, hurdles, and so on. It was extremely difficult because I have to obtain a lot of knowledge, which are multidisciplinary. And basically, so the point which I want to leave you like with this slide and next slide is that development of cyber physical exploits, and I put in brackets even high precision because typically we have in mind what damage scenario we want to cause, requires really significant amount of specialized knowledge and skills. So as I was working towards writing individual exploits for specific tasks, I really came up with this idea. But I would like to execute this cyber-physical attack from start to end. This is a chemical plant. I know nothing about it. And at the end, I need something like a Stuxnet, a payload, where it does what I need with that chemical process. And if you remember, Stuxnet was more than 5, around 7 years to develop, because then they kept it a little bit before they deployed. So, and interestingly enough, so I'm celebrating 7th year anniversary of this research, even though on the big stage I presented at Black Hat. In the same year, I actually pioneered the talk here at Tel Aviv 7 years ago at Cyber Week, basically 7 years ago. And so I presented this cyber-physical attack lifecycle, and it was really the first time ever anybody spoke about exploitation like this. And I received a really gigantic feedback from all kinds of people from all over the world. And as I kept specializing in this field, I a little bit upgraded my cyber-physical attack lifecycle. I figured out that these 2 stages, feedback and response, I need to add them because they're individual stages. And I don't know if anybody here a fan of mainly an attack lifecycle, and you think that this looks like it. It does. And the reason I've done it intentionally because I wanted IT security professionals to kind of feel a little bit as if it is something familiar, just different stages. So this is my specialization. And so as January came and it really became apparent that the war is going to happen, so the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine has asked me to conduct a cybersecurity training for all owners, for all people responsible for critical infrastructure in the country, which was a difficult task because I needed to put something together very tactical, but I also have to teach this training online, which is, again, extremely difficult, sitting all day long and communicating just with your PC. But, we already all felt that war is coming. And to be honest, the atmosphere was through that computer, I could literally feel every heart. And I had heads of security starting from railways, national railways, to nuclear and everything in between. So, oops, I did something wrong. Right. So, yeah, basically, we've been really strategically preparing so that everybody of them could understand which scenarios are possible, what risks their infrastructure are having, can they quickly prepare for the war, what to anticipate, and so on. And as the war started, one of the first tasks which I was asked to assist is that, okay, so we have a lot of critical infrastructure, like oil and gas and power and whatnot, what scenarios? And I was given a gigantic list of scenarios, which was, let's say, people in charge, let's call them that way, were afraid that it could happen to our infrastructures. And they wanted to anticipate, shall we expect this to happen or not? How do they build the rest of the strategies? And as I was going through that long list, it's just no, that's not possible, that's not possible. There will be safety, there will be precautions. That will take a lot of time. They will be able to execute in 3 months and 4 hours. So as we were going through that list, it became apparent we shall not be even expecting any cyber attacks. And especially because if you remember, there have been those gigantic waves of attack in 2015 and 16, where they've been executing. Russia was executing more than 2,000 attacks over the course of 2 months. But to execute that amount of volume of attacks, they've been preparing the whole year because they need to penetrate or get into the gigantic number of infrastructures. They need have persistent foothold. They need to be there so that at the time when they need it, they will not be kicked out. So it takes a lot of time. So obviously, especially after those attacks, now a lot of infrastructures are monitored. So we've seen nothing in the telemetry. So we knew that they don't have even that access. So we have a very good anticipation, which was exactly right. So I predicted correctly that there will be, the infrastructure will be destroyed physically. And here, this is where it's important to understand that in general, you see again, so just because in the news they write, so when we find some piece of script of malware, which is maybe related to the OT, it's immediately predicted, oh my God, we have like something like Stuxnet, and tomorrow, like, I don't know, blackout is happening. No. First of all, to begin with, even to deliver the payload, you need actually to reach the assets where you need to deploy your payload. And it's a gigantic, lengthy process to move laterally. Those assets are so far away on the network segment. So like I bring you here an example on the case where I was in the incident response and forensic, the Triton attack on the Middle East. Just to get to the needed assets, to the safety systems, it took the attacker 12 months, not only because it's a gigantic network which you need to discover, and I'm sure this audience knows very well what I'm talking about, but also you need to stay silent, like you need to stay stealth so that you will not be discovered. So it took them 12 months even to get to the assets. And then, even though, like, when I was doing the forensic, I could see the frustration of the guy. He does not understand why his exploit is not working. He has, like, 100% expectation it should, it just does not. And he's just trying to make it, and he was debugging his implant on the live controller. So, and this is where, as you can see, as he was debugging that payload, so he failed the plan, so it went to shutdown, so eventually they were discovered. So all of that multi-month effort, which is, can you imagine how expensive it is also to keep those people busy? It was just simply wasted. So, and the point is also that even if you successfully find the damage scenario, which will allow you to achieve maybe some prolonged effect on the equipment, and you even successfully cyber execute it, it's not necessarily that physics of the process will allow you to achieve what you want. You can try. So if you remember, there been last year, I think it was an attack on the water plant in Florida. The attacker just got in, just press a couple of buttons on the HMI game. It was overhyped. Oh my gosh, all the attackers can poison us. No, that was absolutely nuisance. So I decided like to show like, okay, if you really want to have, like, for example, if you take again war in mind and you want to have a prolonged disruption of the water supply, you really need some smart scenario. And the smartest scenario would be, of course, you need to damage water filters, because without water filters, you can't produce the water. So I really wanted to implement the scenario. I got access to the realistic, like complete, like one-to-one replica of the water treatment facility. And now I will just jump through the a lot of slides, because, you know, the whole that work was, of course, complex. It took a lot of time, blah, 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 blah. So if I jump it even in a simplified form, and this is also presented in a simplified form, eventually, so filter is get damaged if you reach the overpressure on the membrane of the inside of the filter. And the damage is happening if the pressure is exceeding 2 bars. So it doesn't matter what you do, as much as if you use every possibility to rise pressure in that with a lot of tricks and gimmicks to rise the pressure in that filter, the only pressure which we were able to achieve was 1 bar, which is not even nearly enough to damage the filter. So imagine if the attacker is having this anticipation, there is a war, they need to interrupt water, they maybe have already persistent foothold, they know exactly what to do, they've already studied the control logic and everything. The moment has come, they execute it like, oops, and it's not damaging. So, and this is the point that we still did not learn how to strategically, so the reliability, so there is no way for them to learn this information, what pressure they will be able to achieve, unless trying it on a live process. No documentation will tell you. If they try to learn it on the live process before the war, or let's say before the tactical moment, they run into risk to be discovered. And if they try to do this during the tactical moment when they need it, they run into risks not to achieve effect what they need. So here's a point, so several points which I want to just basically leave you with, is that in the war, when we talk about the kinetic war, we have strategy and tactics. We have very time constant. You know, like you sometimes like make a decision in the next 5 minutes you need to have an effect. So cyber, because of the lower reliability, because of the long time to execute, it does not work very well with those expected needs in the normal, like, kinetic warfare. And even if you try to, even if you will be developing exploit for the same industry, let's say we take water, and it will be completely different water facilities. You need completely different sets of engineers, different sets of exploits, because there will be different equipment, different sensor signal will have different noise and so on. Tuning those exploits, sometimes, simply to get processing of the sensor noise and get it, all the parameterize your payload, sometimes I test up to 2-3 months, and that is valid only for a specific facility. So time to delivery, time to execute for cyber, let's say, warfare or exploits is very, very long. And you can never know in advance whether it will be successful or not. Too many edge cases. And in addition, the problem with the cyber, of course, that it is one-time use weapon. Once you show how you, a strategy, how you exploit certain piece of equipment, you can protect it. Even if you try to execute an attack, for example, in an energy sector, every facility in the energy sector will start immediately threat hunting and will try to find somebody in the networks. So you basically really need to use cyber sparsely, and it's expensive to develop such capabilities. Really expensive in terms of it takes a lot of time, and a lot of people, specialized people. And actually, during this armed conflict, the International Institute of Strategic Studies also published a paper where they actually studied the knowledge, what different state nations are thinking about their cyber capabilities. And it's basically not the even conclusions of the analysts, but this is what nation-state think about their cyber capabilities. And I highlighted you a couple of words that at the moment they don't have enough knowledge about the strategic potential of cyber weapons, because they just don't have enough knowledge about their potential. And just, like in the military, you conduct a lot of drills. You continuously shoot the bombs. You study the radius, time, impact of the air, and so on. In cyber, we just have not tried enough. So, yes, so what has happened at Ukraine, eventually, very simple, all the critical infrastructure was destroyed physically. And especially they've been looking, so for example, if Russia was especially interested in specific region, not only destroyed all the, let's say, civilian housing, but they were specifically looking for the gas supply, water supply, electricity, heat supply, to destroy it all together in one district so that you have a really full-fledged humanitarian crisis. So they've been always looking for that. And of course, all the oil infrastructure, oil depots, and oil refineries were destroyed pretty much at the beginning of the war. However, we know how the rockets and bombs flies, we know the radius and everything, you still need coordinates. So the only way you still very much, the uncertainty of using the kinetic weapon is you need coordinates. And especially if it is a small objects like a small substation or a small water treatment facility, you really need exact coordinates with decimals and so on. And this is where they heavily relied on the army of saboteurs having on the ground. Some of them they imported long time, basically they sent from Russia or recruited long time before the war, or they actively recruiting them even right now. And this is where Russia did not fail. They made a lot of mistakes in the war, we all see them, but this is where they really succeeded, because they really put a lot of effort, is having a very reliable, very extensive army of saboteurs, which would help them with coordinates and with reconnaissance on the ground. So they've been using a lot of different marking methods, and even big, small devices with beacon, so that the rocket could know where to fly. And maybe I'm coming to the end, and one of the interesting maybe examples where that cyber does not work and we need really physical destruction is rail wall in Belorussia. So Belarusian partisans were really putting a lot of effort because Russia was using Belorussia railway to actually get equipment close to Ukraine, and because Ukraine and Belorussia has a gigantic joint border, So they've been conducting large volumes of cyber attacks to disrupt, like supporting business processes, like scheduling of the wagons or locomotives and so on. But like, okay, yeah, the business processes does not work anymore, you have to do manual work, but the rails are still there, the signaling equipment is still there, the trains are going, it does not work. Yes, in a peaceful time, that annoyance would be really very annoying. In the military time, nobody cares. We're still going. So the next stage, which they tried to execute, they started to do physical sabotage. So they basically started to destroy signaling equipment along the railway. And this is where, so that also actually did not help. Why? Because, well, the railways, now trains can only go slowly. They can't go fast, but they still can go. So eventually what has helped, literally, they have to destroy physically the rails between two countries. And this is where there's also an interesting point that when we talk about is it physical or cyber sabotage, in the war times, civilians, is considered to be a legitimate target for physical destruction. And this is where civilians are in a large disadvantage compared to military because they don't have training. So they can't plan their operations. They don't know how to execute it stealthily. So saboteurs, for example, in this case, were caught and shot in the knees. And yes, and actually, according to the Tallinn Manual of War, hackers, if they are identified and attributed, they are a legitimate target for physical disruption as well. So yeah, Ukraine is actually eventually switched and started doing the same physical sabotage on the Russian soil. So they started basically conducted similar sabotage, especially on the oil-related facilities in the Russia. And one of the interesting scenarios was, of course, latest is usage of drone, which you just basically use some explosive, drive it into the facility that explodes. So I really need to speed up, and if anybody of you knows this topic, you would probably remember, well, but there was in Destroyer 2, they've tried to plant it into the one of the substations. Well, it was really super poor attempt. Firstly, they were discovered very early. Secondly, there was no smartness. The only reason why they've tried to execute the attack, because in that specific facility, they discovered that there was a SCADA system, which they used in the previous case of the Destroyer 1. So they just found something familiar. They just opportunistically tried to use the same payload in that facility. They were discovered. Nothing has happened. It just was truly opportunistic, really nothing strategic or nothing dangerous, whatever newspapers are writing. So, and then maybe the last case, which I found extremely interesting, is how the digital data was evacuated. Before the war, because it was expected that there will be a large volume of the attacks. So a lot of critical data was decided like, well, let's upload them into the cloud because we probably can protect that data better. But then, but now somebody can drop a bomb on our data center. So the servers from the data service needed to be evacuated to save that data. So digital data have to be saved twice. So answering the question in my title, twin siblings or distant relatives, well, I think it's none of those. They're probably partners. So cyber is a supporting function, and it's only useful as a short-term tactical advantage, like to gain of it. And yeah, as I probably, like, hopefully you got from this, from my presentation, the tactical efficiency of cyber warfare is still need to be figured out. Thank you very much for your attention.